To break down the latest headlines in crypto space overall, we welcome in John Haar, Managing Director at Swan Bitcoin. Thank you so much for being with us. So I saw Bitcoin when it went above 123,000. It pulled back, now it's at 112,000. You eat, sleep, and breathe Bitcoin. This is your favorite crypto asset of all. Why?
So yeah, at Swan we have a view that Bitcoin is separate from all the other crypto digital assets out there. If you define Bitcoin as a fixed supply, decentralized, peer-to-peer digital monetary asset, and it's credibly all those things, it doesn't just claim to be all those things, we would say it's really the only one that meets that description. We also think the returns have proven that to be the case. Bitcoin has outperformed all the other crypto assets over the long term. It's the one that's being adopted mostly by corporations, wealthy individuals, governments, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, we do have the view that Bitcoin stands alone.
And so Bitcoin was something that it was decentralized, not easily manipulated. At the same time, you now have sovereign wealth funds, the U.S. administration, looking into buying more Bitcoin. Does that sort of mess with the program and the recipe of what Bitcoin was, or not so much?
It's a great question, and it does, raise a lot of debates even within the Bitcoin world. I think when, the early adopters of Bitcoin, they probably were not thinking, let's create this money so that governments can adopt it, so that, $100 billion market cap companies can buy it. That wasn't really the motivation for creating Bitcoin. But at the same time, if you create a permissionless money, what the word permissionless means is anyone can use it. And if it is successful as being a money, then all types of entities are going to use it. There's this expression in the Bitcoin world that whether we like it or not, Bitcoin is money for enemies. If it was a permission system that someone would have to say they can use it and they can't. So I think the reality is it's a sign of Bitcoin's success. I think the adoption of Bitcoin had to go this way, that eventually large corporations and governments would adopt it.
Are you comfortable saying Bitcoin goes to 150,000 in the next year, or what do you say?
So yeah, last time I was here with you was in May, and I had to look back. The price was in the mid-90s, and you did ask the question, price predictions, and I said we would go above 200 by the end of the year. I still do feel that way, obviously with 3.5 months passing, and as you said, we kind of touched 124 is the latest all-time high. Maybe it feels a little bit harder to make that prediction now just because we're that much closer to the end of the year. But I just see so much adoption in my own seat at Swan, plus just following the headlines and news and things like that. It would not surprise me at all for us to cross 200,000 by the end of the year.
Yeah, I remember you were very comfortable with 120,000, and then the 200,000 was sort of the bullish side of your outlook. It was something like that. And I was thinking, because when we hit 120,000, I start to think back when my guests are right, because it's had an incredible run. How much has this administration helped Bitcoin too? Because you've had the ETFs and the approval executive order that aims to allow Bitcoin into 401ks. Is that already happening? Can you put a BitO or iBit or these things into your 401k yet?
So on the last point, that's more of a slow-moving trend. I think it's one of these things that is huge in the long run, but if you're waiting for something to happen in the very near term, it's unlikely. And the reason is because with 401ks, there's a lot of regulations, there's a lot of administrative players, middlemen, that all kind of need to come to an agreement about how they'll provide that exposure in the 401ks. So personally, I think that's more of like at least 6 months down the road, maybe even over a year, before we actually see 401ks at a widespread level putting Bitcoin in there. But the road is being paved for that to happen. Just in general, I would say the administration being generally supportive of Bitcoin is massive, because there were just so many people that were waiting to get their first Bitcoin exposure. And I talked to these people directly, my old colleagues from Goldman, friends, family, whoever. And usually in the top 3 hesitations was that the government is going to do something negative to Bitcoin, make it more difficult, make it illegal, tax it, or, onerously, something like that. With an administration that is outright supportive, that fear is certainly alleviated. So I do think it is a huge deal for Bitcoin.
The 200-day moving average, you said, crossed above 100,000 for the first time last week. That's very exciting. At Swan Bitcoin, you're really focused on Bitcoin and cash, not really delving into all the different kinds of crypto assets, and you can explain why. At the same time, something like MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor has been, their acquisition strategy has been for Bitcoin. What do you think when people ask you that they love this kind of way to get into Bitcoin? What do you tell them?
Yeah, so I think we do have this notion of having like your Bitcoin exposure at Swan. We would say the majority, vast majority, let's say 80% or more should be in spot Bitcoin and in a form of custody that is right for you. If you're willing and able to take self-custody and have the power over the asset, we think you should do that. But that's also not something people are going to learn, in 15 minutes. So maybe the right way to get this exposure is spot via an ETF. That should be 80% of your exposure. If you're going to play with these other vehicles, which we call leveraged Bitcoin equities, like MicroStrategy, we would say keep it to 20% or less. The reasons we say that is because this is much more of an active trade. We believe that you could buy and hold Bitcoin for 5, 10, 20 years,
right.
Really just keep it there and be very happy. MicroStrategy is much more of an active trade. The volatility is much higher. You need to do a lot more homework before you're going to get involved.
You talked about governments picking up Bitcoin. You also mentioned here Ivy League universities, Harvard and Brown, now showing some exposure to Bitcoin as well. What do we think about when the Fed, if and when the Fed cuts rates, how Bitcoin may behave?
So generally speaking, I would say a Fed entering a rate cutting cycle, and it's as long as it's not in response to some crazy problem in the financial system, then I would say Bitcoin rallies on the back of that, most likely. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors that could be at play. I think we'll find out the answer to this because right now the market is predicting greater than 90% chance of a Fed cut in September. All things equal, I would expect Bitcoin to rally on the back of that.
Do you think the administration's trying to diminish the importance of the dollar and or gold while they push Bitcoin higher?
That is a loaded one. I think there is a little bit of that going on. It's one of these things where I don't believe the administration can ever come out and say, we want the dollar to be weaker. They kind of have to defend the currency that is a huge tool in their toolkit. But you can kind of read between the lines, and there have been some papers written by people in the administration, like Stephen Mirren, for example, that have explicitly talked about the dollar being overvalued due to the nature of the system and the dollar being the reserve currency. So you read between the lines and you say, okay, they probably do want a weaker dollar relative to other fiat currencies. Whether they support, gold as kind of a neutral reserve asset or Bitcoin as a neutral reserve asset, I think it's too early for them to come out and say we're absolutely doing this. But I think as the years go on, we're going to find out if that's a playbook they want to run.
It's great to see you. Thank you so much. Nice to have John Haar, Managing Director at Swan Bitcoin, with us today. Really appreciate it. Great conversation.